Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wobbly94. I hope you're doing well today. I'm gonna tell you right now, my arms hurt. I'm having a hard time lifting my arms up at all. I went to the gym yesterday for the first time in months because it's just been so busy the last few months since October, and I finally got into the gym that I got a membership for in September. So yeah, a lot of money down the drain, but I'm back in there now. I feel good. I just have achy arms for day one. Anyway, so I have a hard time keeping my arms up or moving my hands as much as I usually do. That's why. Anyway, today I'm doing a book review for a book that, of course, my channel is more horror-centric than anything else. I do some thriller stuff and some mystery stuff, or at least I will at some point, because I do read those kinds of things too. This book has a little bit of horror to it. I've never read the story before. I'm not exactly sure the history of the Nutcracker story. I'm going to be honest with you. I think there's like a previous, myth, fairy tale type of thing, but I'm reviewing the Alexander Dumas version of the story. My mom got this for me either last Christmas or the Christmas before in Barnes & Noble. This is one of their small leather-bound, or whatever this bound small edition is. It's not a paperback, though. This is the Nutcracker by Alexander Dumas, one of the most beautiful looking books I've ever seen in my life. I absolutely love this, dude. Look at the detailing on this. It's so great. Now, if you don't know me that well, I'm a huge fan of Christmas, as is my wife. And we have a Nutcracker collection. I've had one since I was a kid. I got her into it. They're just so cool. I love Nutcrackers. I've always loved, mind you, when I was a kid, I absolutely loved the Barbie VHS of the Barbie and the Nutcracker thing, which is, I rewatched that this Christmas for the first time in like 10 years. It was terrible. Let's see. I love the Nutcracker. I think it's the 1994, I think it's a Japanese or Chinese, I'm pretty sure it's a Japanese adaptation of this particular story. It's the closest adaptation I've seen to this particular book. This story's about 140 pages long. And I'm going to tell you, I loved this. I've never read it before. I've seen, God knows how many adaptations of this story done a billion times over. I saw this one that I grew up on that I loved when I was a kid called The Nuttiest Nutcracker. It's absolutely awful. There's Jim Belushi in it. It's genuinely horrific if you want a Christmas book that'll just, or a movie that'll just ruin your Christmas because of how awful it aged. It is not good, needless to say. I don't know how my mom and dad stood me watching that movie over and over again during December when I was a kid. God bless them. Anyway, so Alexander Dumas' story. How does this book go? Is it the typical story that all these retellings are based on? Yeah, I would say so. I don't think there's an original here. I don't know if it's based on the ballet or if the ballet is based on this. I'm not really sure. I'm not a ballet guy. I haven't watched a ballet Nutcracker thing ever. I don't know anything about it. But this story is kind of starting off as a story within a story. Basically, a guy goes to a party. I think he brings his own kid or something. And I think he falls asleep or something, and a bunch of kids just tie him down and basically won't let him go until he tells them a story. I think he's a writer or a journalist of some sort. I think he's a writer. I don't remember. It's been a while since I started the book. I was really busy during December. I wanted to watch a bunch of Christmas movies that my wife and I typically watch. Spent a lot of time with family and friends and whatnot, so I was busy. You know, I really didn't have the time to consistently read much of anything. I read a lot of stuff scattered about all over the place, trying to keep up with the Goosebumps channel and trying to keep up with the new movie review thing I'm doing with Strange Michael, which is my other channel. So Alexander Dumas writes a story here about a fellow telling a story. This story is about a young boy and girl named Mary and Fritz, particularly Mary, who gets caught in a situation when their godfather Drosselmeyer drops off some presents for them at Christmas Eve. And I learned a lot. I always wondered why in a lot of the adaptations I saw, why people were opening presents, or the kids were opening presents, not really opening them, they were hanging from the tree, like literally stuck in the Christmas tree and sitting around the Christmas tree on tables and stuff. I wondered why in a lot of the adaptations I loved and grew up on, why the kids opened presents on Christmas Eve. And I always thought that was odd, because my family always did that on Christmas Eve. And we just did it because of the time's sake. You know, my parents were split up. I had to go to my dad's on Christmas Day. And I noticed here they basically described that that's a German tradition, I believe, is what they said. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. I learned some cool little historical stuff. And I will tell you, too, I love this book. I think it's fantastic. It's the kind of book that if it was written by the modern writing style of just telling you every single little detail of every single thing and drawing everything out too much, it would suck It would be boring. I think everything from the narrative voice to the actual tale itself, I loved it. I loved everything about this book. I told my mom yesterday, who got it for me, that I just genuinely loved it. I've been on a big Solomon Kane kick here lately. It was the first time I've ever read that. It's been the biggest influence on my writing I've ever seen, aside from Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and Goosebumps from R.L. Stine. And the way I saw this book being written is very much like Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane stories. If you like that very kind of direct way of telling a story. When you introduce a character, you tell a lot of their backstory and really develop them, and then you tell the tale. You don't need to have so much expansion and so much middle ground nonsense about, you don't need to have middle of the book syndrome or second act syndrome where your second act completely slumps. Just tell the tale, jump into the action. Don't do so much setup that takes months to get into. I think this is a lot of the reason why self-published authors are doing so successful most of the time nowadays, because a lot of them are writing in this style, just not with this kind of very operatic way of speaking. You know, the narrative voice is amazing in here. But there is some horror elements in here. Of course, like I said, a little girl, Mary, and her brother are opening presents on Christmas Eve in a tradition. And one of the things that the godfather Drosselmeyer brings to them is, or particularly, it's supposed to be for both of them, but it's kind of more for Mary, because she attaches herself to it more. It's a Nutcracker. And it slowly starts to develop when the Nutcracker and some of the toys come to life and stuff, when there's a big event on that night where a bunch of mice come into the room and try to just destroy everything, right? Because mice are awful. I've dealt with mice in my previous apartment, my first ever apartment, when my wife and I were married and we lived in an apartment last year. It was awful. It was awful. I hate mice. I don't mind apartments. I just hate mice, and my apartment complex wouldn't do anything about it. They suck. So I have a very special place in my heart about how much I hate mice, because I've never had to deal with them as a kid, and now I did as an apartment, and it's awful. You don't want to leave your bedroom if you know it's safe, but then you don't know if it's safe. It sucks. Anyway, getting on to the point, there's a lot of horror elements about the way the Nutcracker is described. I noticed there's illustrations in the book, too, which are really solid. I like those a lot, too. They remind me most of the time, the Nutcracker himself, the design for him, reminds me of Punch, you know, the puppet. Punch the puppet. I really, really, really loved the story. The horror elements are just unbelievable. There's a particular part of the story that you might have known about the Princess Prilipat, I think is what it was. The description of her and her deformity are utterly horrific. And then some of the illustrations that show certain things like that are horrific. I mean, nightmare fuel, dude. I was amazed by how much I loved this book. I really was. I had a blast with it. It really, really influenced me and my writing. I gotta tell you, you know, I've seen endless adaptations of the Nutcracker. I love the Nutcracker story. I think it's fantastic, but I will tell you, this very well may be, even though it's technically not probably the original, but it's one of the originals that everybody adapts from, I will tell you, I think this is my favorite one I've ever encountered. Anything, book, movie, anything. I think it's the best Nutcracker story out there. I think it's so good. If you have missed out on this for whatever reason, and you happen to be a Christmas fan or a Nutcracker fan, you need to check this out. It's very Christmassy. It's so horrific in some of the sequences. There's some brutality in here with the war between the mice and the toys. There's great humor in here, dude. The humor's great. The jokes are great. There's a little bit of an element of Goosebumps inspired. Well, Goosebumps is inspired by this. Because there's parts of it where the parents, of course, don't believe the little girl, Mary, and where she's trying to make her case, but nobody wants to listen to her. She's kind of just stuck in her own isolated bubble of trying to figure out how to handle the situation with the toys and the mice. But also this adventure aspect of the book is something I loved. I'm not like an adventure fantasy guy. I've never been an adventure fantasy guy. I love dark fantasy, like as in like horror fantasy type of stuff, like The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub. That's the only fantasy I really venture into as of yet. I've just never been a big fantasy guy. I haven't read Lord of the Rings. I love Harry Potter, mainly because it's mostly horror, you know. But I will tell you, Alexander Dumas, I've never read anything from him. I knew that he did The Three Musketeers, of course. I never read those. I want to now, because I've gotten more and more into this kind of writing style from like Robert E. Howard and this situation with Alexander Dumas and the Nutcracker, I just loved this so much. The writing style, the storytelling, the events. It just feels like the kind of stories I want to write, but it's not even just that. I don't want you to think it's just like, oh, this is my current push for what I want to do. It's not that kind of thing. The book is amazing. It's genuinely a fantastic read, and maybe it's just me overhyping it. I don't know. I would be curious to see if any of you guys think the same thing or not, but in my opinion, I just loved it. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, and it's a beautiful read. It's a beautiful read, and the illustrations are great in here. I do think the ending involving Mary is a bit odd. If you're watching a lot of the adaptations, it's not so odd. But watching it here was a little odd. Mary is not like a 16-year-old girl in the story. From what I remember, I'm pretty sure that she's not very old. Maybe less than 10, maybe right at 10. So the ending of the story, I won't spoil it for you. Of course, I don't spoil things here unless I make a video specifically saying spoiler talk or discussion. The ending here throws me off because I don't know. If you read the book, you see what I'm talking about. It's a little weird, but everything else I loved about it. I thought it was an amazing read. I had a blast, as I've raved about to you for like 15-20 minutes now. Anyway, The Nutcracker by Alexander Dumas. I loved it. I recommend it highly if you haven't read this before. It's so great. If you've ever seen an adaptation that you love, or you love Christmas, or you love nutcrackers just as a decoration or anything, or you have your own collection, dude, check this book out. It's fantastic. It's so good. I loved it so much, and it's worth every second that you spend on it. For real. Great read. Loved it. If I had to rate it on a 5-star basis, I would give this a 5 out of 5 stars. I love it so much. I cannot believe I've never read it. I can't believe, even as a kid, that I never knew this was a book. If I had known I would have had this, I would have already read it like 500 times. This would have been a Christmas tradition for me, and it may very well be a Christmas tradition for me from now on, because of the horror aspects. It kind of surprised me how much I dug that. There you go. Alexander Dumas' The Nutcracker. I loved it. I can't wait to put it back on my shelf. It's a beautiful looking book. It just makes my horror collection on my bookshelf look classier, if you will. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. What are your thoughts on Alexander Dumas? What are your thoughts on the Nutcracker book itself? I know I don't understand the history. I know I rambled quite a bit, but it's a personal book and a personal story to me because of how much I enjoyed it, how much I love nutcrackers and all that. I needed to talk a little bit about some of these adaptations and stuff with you. Anyway, what are your thoughts on all this down below? Are you going to check out the book after my recommendation? I'd love to hear that as well. And if you did, what did you think about it? Because I want to know. I know it's a little late for this review, but I just finished it yesterday or the day before. And I wanted to get out the review. So, anyway, thank you for watching. God bless you guys. Happy New Year, of course. It's already into, like, the 6th or 7th day of January of 2022. That's weird. It's real weird. Anyway, thank you for watching. God bless you. Goodbye.